Well, so how a cell is formed in stomach? First of all, we know that parietal cells are present in stomach. The acid is secreted by these cells. The parietal cells have abundant number of carbonic anhydrase. This can catalyze H2O that is present within the parietal cells and CO2 that comes either from the interstitial fluid, that means from blood. Interstitial fluid is the fluid present in between the tissue spaces, which acts as a medium for exchange of substances between blood and cell. So within the parietal cells there is H2O, carbon dioxide, CO2 comes from interstitial fluid, or it may be also be produced within the parietal cells by the metabolism. Now after that, this carbonic anhydrase can catalyze H2O and CO2 into carbonic acid, that is H2CO3. This carbonic acid dissociates into H plus and bicarbonate, that is HCO3 minus, one cation, one anion. So this H plus, let us consider this as parietal cell whole. This H2O and CO2 converted into a carbonic acid by carbonic anhydrase, then it get dissociated into H plus and bicarbonate ions. Now from parietal cells, this H plus is pumped out of the cell into the lumen of the stomach. How it is pumped out? In the apical membrane, which is facing towards the lumen. In the basolateral membrane, this is apical membrane. Which is facing towards the lumen of the stomach, and this is basolateral membrane, which is facing towards the interstitial fluid. Okay, now in the apical membrane there are some hydrogen H plus K plus ATPase system. Its function is to pump out one hydrogen in exchange of one potassium into the cell. So one hydrogen comes out of the cell into the lumen in exchange of one potassium ion that moves into the cell from lumen. This process needs energy, which comes from the hydrolysis of ATP. Okay, fine. So for HCl we already got the H. in the lumen. Now, where from the Cl comes? Well, this bicarbonate now moves into the interstitial fluid. By a antipode system. By how it moves out of the parietal cells into the interstitial fluid? By antipode system. Now what does it mean? Antipode means movement of substances in opposite direction. Two substances in opposite directions. So from the parietal cells, bicarbonate ion moves out of the cells into the interstitial fluid in exchange of another anion, and the most abundant anion in the interstitial fluid is Cl minus, that is chlorine. So by antipode method, chlorine comes into the parietal cells and bicarbonate moves into the interstitial fluid, and since there is influx of potassium by hydrogen potassium ATPase system, and also now there is influx of chlorine by antipode system. So this potassium and chlorine are pumped out of the cell by the process of diffusion. How it is moved out of the cell? By the process of diffusion. So we have to keep in mind three things. What are the three things? Hydrogen moves into the lumen by hydrogen potassium ATPase. Chlorine comes into the cell by antipode system in exchange of bicarbonate ion. And the last thing is the movement of L plus and Cl minus from cell by diffusion. Okay, so now there is both H plus and Cl minus in the lumen of stomach, and these two makes HCl.